Hello, all you wonderful, wonderful, wonderful people. Today I will be horrendously reading the next chapter of The Demon King. So, yeah, been a couple months since I read a chapter of this, so we're gonna continue through this. Chapter 7 In the Glass Garden. Reza hurried down the corridor, her dancing slippers whispering over the marble floors. She intended to return to her chambers and change clothes, but was at a loss for what to put on. Her clan leggings and tunic were filthy dirty. She had no play clothes anymore, and anyway, this new Soman Amon, in his dress uniform, seemed to call for something more formal. But what if he'd change into breeches and shirt? She'd feel foolish in her gown. Hold on. She was the Princess Air, come from a dance. Why should she feel foolish at all? What was the matter with her? Margaret was waiting up, nursing a cup of tea, her graying hair taken down and plaited. "You're back earlier than I expected, Your Highness," she said, rising and dipping a curtsy. "I thought it would go later." "It will. I'm going to see Amon now," Reza said, sitting in front of her mirror and removing the circlet. She'd leave the gown on, she decided, but take down the hair. Then, then she'd. "Now?" Margaret stared at her. "At this hour?" Reza blinked up at her. "Well, yes." And when Margaret continued to frown, added, "What?" "You can't go off meeting a young man on your own in the middle of the night." What didn't Margaret understand? It's Ahmad. We used to stay out overnight all the time. Remember when Remember when Cook found us under the baker's table at sunrise? We wanted to be ready when the cinnamon buns came out of the oven. Reza tugged a brush through her restrained hair, thinking a mom would never fit under the baker's table now. Not with those long legs. "You'll not go out without a chaperone at this hour," Margaret said stubbornly. "I already said I'd meet him," Reza said, plaiting her hair into a loose braid. "No one will know anyway. If you go, I'll speak with Lady Francia, who will interrupt the Queen," Margaret said, thrusting her chin forward triumphantly. "You wouldn't," Reza said, now thoroughly sorry. Now thoroughly sorry she'd not gone directly to her rendezvous. "I would, Your Highness. You'll be 16 in July and eligible for marriage. It will be my head if anything happens to you. I mean, he's a soldier after all." "Blood of Helena, I'm not marrying anyone, Margaret. Not for a long time. I'll take 100 lovers before then, just for spite." She wanted to say, "Besides, I'd be more likely to get into trouble in the card room with Mika or under Mother's nose in the banquet hall than with Amon, Reza thought. They glared at each other for a long moment at an impasse. Fine, Reza said. Come with me, then. Margaret looked down at her chamber gown. Obviously, she thought she was in for the night. Really, Your Highness? I don't think. Reza put on her imperious princess. Reza put on her imperious princess face. If you insist on coming, you might as well make up a tray for Ahmad. He stood guard at the door all during dinner, so he's not eaten. A quarter hour and much grumbling later, they left Reza's room. Reza in the lead, Margaret following. Margaret following, rediting disapproval, carrying a large silver tray. They climbed several flights of stairs that grew narrower and steeper as they ascended. Are you meeting him on the roof, then? Margaret wheezed, 2 flights behind Reza. We're meeting in the glass garden, Reza said, pausing at the top of the last flight to let Margaret catch up. It would have been much easier to go up by the secret staircase, but that was one secret she didn't intend to share with Margaret. She'd not shared it with Mika either. Once disclosed, it couldn't be taken back if it became awkward or inconvenient. The greenhouse must have been a showplace once, designed by someone with the love for gardens. They entered through tall bronze doors decorated with cunning vines, flowers, animals, and insects cast into the metal. The air inside was most fragrant, with earth and flowers and the breath of growing things. The dark slate floor gathered up sunlight all day long and gave heat back during the night. Hot water from thermal springs circulated through pipes, controlled by a series of valves so the temperatures could be adjusted to meet the need of tropical, desert, and temperate plants. Queen Marina had little use for gardens, preferring her flowers to be arranged in vases, but Reza shared a passion for digging in the dirt with her father. On those rare occasions he stayed at Fellsmarsh Castle, they spent hours in companionable silence, rooting, cutting, and thinning seedlings. With both of them gone these past 3 years, the garden was overgrown and neglected. The more aggressive plants crowding out of the crowding out the weaker, more delicate kinds. Ponds were broken here, and they're stuffed with wool or curdly mended with ill-fitting patches. Some areas of the garden were too cold now for any but native plants. Reza led Margaret to the entrance of the maze. Amon would be waiting in one of the side passages in the pavilion next to the fountain. Guess we'll have to find a new place to meet, Reza thought, now that Margaret knows about this one. Although she might not be able to find her way back, Reza confidently threaded her way through the leafy tunnels. Margaret tight on her heels, as if afraid Reza might sprint away and leave her stranded. The boxwood walls had nearly grown together in some places, and more than once they had to push through tangled branches. "You're going to ruin that dress on the first wearing," Margaret complained, licking her fingers and rubbing it over the prick in Race's satin skirt. Reza heard Amon before she saw him. He was pacing back and forth, muttering to himself. At first she thought he was grumbling because she was late, but it seemed he was practicing some sort of speech. "Your Highness, may I say how honored I am that you... how pleased I am to be remembered. Gah!" He shook his head in disgust and cleared his throat. "Your Highness, I was astounded. No surprise when you spoke to me, and I hope that you might consider our friendship." "Helena's bloody bones!" he exclaimed, smacking himself in the forehead. "What an idiot." Raising her hand to indicate that Margaret should stay where she was, Reza moved forward. "Amon?" He jumped and swiveled around, his hand automatically going to the hilt of his sword. He tried to change it into a kind of elegant gesture, extending his hand toward her and bowing low. "Your Highness," he croaked, straightened and staring at her. You look well." "Your Highness." She strode toward him, satin switching, chin lifted, and previously, "Your Highness?" "Well," he said, flushing furiously, She gripped both his hands and looked up, way up past the square brimmed chin and straight nose and into his gray eyes. "Bones, Amon. It's me, Reza. Have you ever in your life called me your Highness?" He studied on it. "As I remember, there were several times you made me call you that," he said dryly. Her face grew hot. "I never did." He raised an eyebrow, an expression she remembered well, very annoying. Well, she conceded, "All right, maybe a few times." He shrugged. "It's probably best if I get used to calling you that," he said, "if I'm going to be at court." "I suppose," she said. They stood like that, hands linked awkwardly for a moment. She was suddenly very aware of the contact. Her heart stuttered. "So," he said, "you look well," he repeated. He couldn't seem to decide where he should be looking, which gave him a rather shifty-eye appearance. "And you should... and you look tall," she replied, briskly withdrawing her hands. "Are you hungry? Margaret brought supper for you." He flinched and glanced around, his gaze lighting on Margaret sulking next to an ancient jade tree. The eyebrow again. "You brought Margaret along here?" Reza shrugged. "She wouldn't let me come otherwise. It's hard these days." "Oh," he hesitated. "Well, I am hungry," he admitted. Reza motioned to Margaret, who set the tray on a small, wrought iron table at the waterside, lit the torches, and then withdrew to a bench close enough so she might still overhear what they were saying. "Please," Reza said to Amon, "sit." She settled into a chair and chose a small bunch of grapes to nibble on, though she was still stuffed from dinner. She was glad to have the distraction of the food, glad it gave them something to focus on besides each other. Amon carefully removed his uniform jacket and hung it on the back of his chair. Underneath, he wore a snowy white linen shirt. He rolled the sleeves past the elbows, exposing tanned and muscled arms. Sorry, he said, finally sitting. I'm used to doing my own laundry at Winehouse, so I try to keep my cuffs off of my soup. He enthusiastically into tucked into the bread, cheese, and fruit Margaret had assembled, washing it down with cider. He looked up once and caught Reza staring at him. "Excuse me," he said hastily, swiping at his mouth with his napkin. "I rode a long way today. I'm starving, and I'm used to eating in the barracks. It's kind of a free-for-all." To Reza, it was a relief to talk to someone who didn't try to flatter her, who said what he thought, who wasn't so smooth and she felt clumsy and ill-spoken herself. So, she said, "You're assigned to the guard this summer?" He nodded, chewed, and swallowed. "And every summer from now on." "Will you be working a lot?" "Aye. My doll, er, my doll, I, alright. Aye, my doll. Make sure the queen gets her money worth from my sorry hide." He rolled his eyes. "I might get to see you if I'm assigned to your personal guard, but that's unlikely for the first year in the guard." "Oh," Reza said, disappointed. She'd been lonely since returning to Fellsmarsh from Demonia. There was Mika, of course, but being with him wasn't exactly relaxing, not even with the chaperone. She looked forward to the summer, knocking about with the Amon. She remembered. It hadn't occurred to her that he'd be so different, or that he wouldn't have any free time. "I hoped we could ride up the Firehole Falls again. I heard that there was a new geyser that shoots 50 feet in the air." "Really?" Amon cocked his head. "You haven't gone to see it?" "I was waiting for you, remember? That time we went swimming at Demon Springs? They'd fished for trout in the fire hole and cooked their catch in one of the steam fishers that crazed the landscape." "Ah," he looked uncomfortable. "The Queen may not like the notion of us riding off on our own anymore." "Why not?" "Several reasons." He paused, and when she didn't respond, added, "For one thing, it's more dangerous than it used to be." Reza twitched impatiently. "Everybody keeps saying that." "Because it's true. And why else?" Reza persisted. "I'm a soldier, and I'm of age. You'll be of age by midsummer. It's different. People will talk." Reza made a disgusted noise. "People will talk regardless." But she knew he was right. After an uncomfortable silence, she changed the subject. "Tell me about Odin's Ford." "Well," Amon hesitated, as if to be sure she really meant it. "The academy is split by the Tamron River. Winehouse, the warrior school, is on one side, and Mistrick, the wizard school, is on the other. Guess they thought it's best to keep the two separated in the beginning. Those were the first two, but these days there are other schools as well. There are 50 plebs in Winehouse each year. They come from all over, from Tamron and the Fells and Arden and Brunswallow. Some of them are actually at war with each other, but they're not allowed to bring it onto campus. There's something called the Peace of Odin's Ford that's enforced really strictly. Odin's Ford itself is like a small realm all on its own. It's on the border between Tamron and Arden, but it doesn't belong to either. Where do you stay? Reza asked, kicking off her shoes and drawing her feet up under the gown, while Margaret scrolled disapprovingly. Each class stays together until we're proficients, Amon said. Then we can choose our own housing. Is it pretty evenly balanced in Winehouse? Girls and boys? Reza asked casually. He shook his head. We send girls from the Fells, but in the South things are different. They have strange notions about what girls can do. Some say it's the influence of the Church of Malthus. Ah, Reza nodded, wisely, pretending to understand. Amon seemed so informed, so worldly next to her. And she was Princess Heir of the Queendom. Shouldn't she know about these things? Did her mother, the Queen, know about them? Maybe not. Morena had never traveled outside the Queendom either. Reza was seized by the sudden desire to go anywhere out of the Fells. So it's about three quarters boys, 1/4 girls, Amon went on. The girls hold their own, though. Being a soldier isn't all about brute strength, as some of the Southerners have found out, he laughed. What do you do then? She asked. Do you do you do seat work or drill or what? Right, she thought, eyeing him sidelong. Seat work didn't put the muscle on your arms and chest. Some classroom, some applied, Amon said, seeming pleased by her interest. We train in strategy, geography. Let me try that again. We train in strategy, horsemanship, weaponry, that sort of thing. We study great battles in history and analyze the outcome. The further along you are, the more practical application. I wish I could go, Reza blurted. You do? Amon looked surprised. Well, it'd be too dangerous, I think. These days, just getting to and from school is a challenge. Why is that? Reza Give me a moment. Mouth a little dry. Okay. Anyways. It's dangerous getting to class these days. Just getting to and from school is a challenge. Why is that? Reza fingered her Brera Rose necklace. Maybe her yearning for foreign lands come from her traitor father. You know there's a civil war in Arden. 5 brothers fighting over the throne, each with an army. So if you're a military age in the South, even if you're just passing through, you're at risk of being ganged into somebody's army. In military ages defined broadly, age 10 to 80 or thereabouts. He pushed back from the table, stretching out his legs, massaging his muscles in his thighs as though they hurt. Plus, You never know when you're crossing enemy lines or walking straight into a battle. Deserters and bands of mercenaries pat- between patrons are everywhere. These days, people don't even try to identify you before they run you through. My father's an Arden, Reza said with a shiver. Did you know? He nodded. Da told me. He paused, looking like he wished he could take back what he just said. He's Demonia and he was a warrior once. I'm sure he'll be all right. When's he coming home? She shook her head. No idea. I wish he'd come. I just feel uneasy, you know? Like something's going to happen. Reza thought of what Adon Bryn had said about the lawlessness in the countryside and the need for the guard on a simple hunt. What else is going on that she didn't know about? What do you think we should be doing differently? She asked. About the wars, I mean. He colored. It's not my place to. I don't care if it's your place or not. She leaned across the table toward him. I want to know what you think, just between us. Amon studied her as if not sure whether to believe her or not. When I'm queen, Reza thought grimly, people won't be afraid to speak their minds, just between us. She nodded. Well, he said, his gray eyes steady on hers, Da and I have been talking. The Civil War in Arden isn't going to last forever. If nothing else, they'll run out of soldiers. One of those bloody Montaigne brothers is going to come out on top, and when he does, he's going to need money. He'll look north, south, and west for new territory. We think there's things we could be doing now that would help protect us in the future, such as raise a prompted. Get rid of the mercenaries, Amon said bluntly. They're always for sale in the Montagnes are bloody treacherous. We need an army that's unquestionably loyal, made up of native born. Even if it's smaller, otherwise the queen could be overthrown by our own soldiers. But, raise a bitter lip, where would we get recruits? Times are hard. Who would volunteer? He shrugged. Men from the fells are selling their swords to Arden, he said. Meanwhile, we're importing trouble from the south. Why pay foreigners to fight for us? Give people a reason to stay home where they belong. What reason? Reza persisted. I don't know. Something to fight for? To believe in? Decent living? He threw up his hands. Like I'm an expert, I'm just a cadet. But it's for what my father thinks. But it's what my father thinks. Do you know? Has Captain Bryn discussed this with the Queen? Reza asked. Amon looked away from her, unrolling his sleeves with exaggerated attention. He's tried, but Queen Morena has lots of advisors, and Dad's just the captain of her guard. Reza had the feeling he left as much unsaid as said. What about General Clemath? What does he think? What does he think? Reza asked. Plymouth was father to Kip and Keith, her persistent suitors. Well, Amon said, rubbing the bridge of his nose. He thought he's the one who brought in the mercenaries in the first place. He's not likely to support a change. We have wizards, Reza said, thinking that was the kind of conversation she should be having with her mother. We have Lord Bayer and the rest of the council. They'll protect us from Flatlanders. Aye, Odmund nodded, if you can trust 'em. You become a cynic in the south, Reza said, rubbing her eyes and realizing it has been a very long day. You don't trust anyone? That's how you stay alive in the south, Amon said, staring out at the fountain. Reza smothered a yawn. That's how you deal with suitors, too? You don't trust any of them? Amon's head jerked up. Suitors? Has that started already? Already, Reza shrugged. I'm nearly 16. My mother married when she was 17. Amon looked appalled. But you don't have to marry, right? Right away, do you? Reza shook her head. I'm not getting married anytime soon, she declared flatly. Not for years and years, she added when Amon didn't look reassured. My mother's still young, and she'll rule for a long time yet. Reza was glad to be in the role of expert for once. She looked forward to courtship, but marriage was another thing altogether. Ray. Will you have to marry an old man? Ammon asked, with a familiar Bryn bluntness. Not that I think your da. Well, he is a lot older than the Queen is, all I'm saying. It depends. I could marry clan royalty or even some king for princeling from Tamron or Arden. It could be an old man, I guess. That's a good reason to put marriage off as long as possible. Had her mother ever loved her father? Reza wondered. Or had it been purely a political match? Before she'd gone to Daemonia, it seemed like they had been more of a family. How much did Reza, current aversion to marriage, have to do with what she saw between her parents? She looked up to find Amon watching her. He looked away quickly, but she'd seen the sympathy in his gray eyes. He was so different from Mika. Mika was intoxicating, always challenging everything she believed. Amon was comfortable, like a pair of broken-in moccasins. And yet the changes in him were intriguing. She glanced over at Margaret. Her nurse was sound asleep, stretched out on one of the park benches, mouth open, snoring. Well, Amon said, following her gaze, we've lost her. He stood, and I'm on duty at sunrise. With your permission, I'll say good night. He looks dead on his feet, Reza thought with a rush of guilt. Of course. But first, I've got something to show you, she said, still unwilling to let him go, still wanting to negotiate some new kind of treaty. There's a secret passageway. It's like a shortcut. We can go that way. Amon hesitated, frowning. Where does it lead out? Where does it let out? You'll see, Reza said mysteriously. Amon tilted his head toward Margaret. What about her? Let her sleep, Reza said. She looked comfortable enough. She may never find her way out on her own, Aman said. I promise I'll fetch her in the morning, Reza said, lifting free one of the torches. She marched off between the walls of greenery, not looking back to see if Aman was following, but soon hearing the crunch of his boots on the gravel path, they circled around and around until they reached the center of the maze. There, an exquisite worn iron temple stood foreignly amid a tangle of old roses and overgrown, fragrant gardens. Honeysuckle and wisteria twined over trellises and covered the roof, dangling nearly to the ground, giving it the look of a living cave or a lover's bower. Even Reza had to duck her head to enter. Leaves and twigs littered the floor. At one end stood an altar to the Maker, sitting a semicircle of stone benches with room for no more than a dozen worshippers. Yeah. A stained glass window at the other end depicted Helena in battle, sword drawn, hair flying, in daylight when the sun shone through it. It sent rivers of color washing over the stone floor. Amid the stone paves in the floor was set a metal plate engraved with wild roses. Raisin knelt and brushed away the debris with her forearm. Under here, she said, pointing. You have to lift it. Setting his torch into the bracket in the wall, Aman grasped a ring set into the plate and pulled, rocking back on his heels. Fingers are going numb from holding the book. Hinges screeching, the plate swung up, followed by a rush of dank, stale air. Aman looked up at Reza. When's the last time you were down here? Reza shrugged. Maybe 2 months ago. It's hard because there's always people around. I'd better go first, Aman said, eyeing her gown skeptically. Who knows what moved in here since you last visited? There's a ladder along the side, Reza said helpfully. Bracing his hand on either side of the opening, Aman lowered himself until his feet found the first rungs. He climbed down until his head and shoulders disappeared below floor level. He stopped at the point he reached his hand up. Reza handed him the torch and he resumed to descend until he reached the floor, 2 stories below. He looked up and she could see his face in the torchlight. He seemed far away. It's a long way down, he said. I don't think this is such a good idea. It's fine, she said with more confidence that she felt. I've been up and down before. Only not in slippers and a tightly fitted satin dress, she might have added, but didn't. Let's go back out the way we came, Aman argued, putting his foot on the lower rung. You can show me the passage another time when you're dressed for it. When are we going to get another chance? Reza said stubbornly. Like I said, there's always people around and you're going to be working every day. She knew she was being unreasonable, but she was tired. And she felt cheated. She faced the prospect of a summer on her own again, for all intents and purposes, when she wanted to adventure with Amon. I'm coming up, Amon warned, taking hold of the ladder with both hands. I'm coming down, Reza said loudly, turning and feeling for the first rung with her extended foot. Just wait a minute, all right? He disappeared from sight, but she could hear him moving around down there, see torchlight reflecting off the damp wall. He reappeared at the foot of the ladder, looking up at her, a big smear of dirt on his right cheekbone. It's clear a few rats is all. Come on down, but be careful. That was easier said than done. The rungs were far apart, difficult to manage by someone her size. In the best of circumstances, nearly impossible in her dress. Her silk slippers gave her no purchase on the metal rungs. She hitched her skirt up above her knees, clutching it in one hand and holding on to the ladder with the other, wondering what kind of sight this presented to Amon below. She was halfway down when she lost her single-handed grip on a slippery metal ladder, teetered a moment, arms flailing when she fell screaming through space. She landed with a whump in Amon's arms. He staggered back a few steps, and for a moment she thought they'd both gone down, but he regained his balance and ended leaning against the wall, breathing hard, cradling her close against the damp wool of his uniform jacket. She could hear the heart hammering next to her ear. Helena's bloody bones, he swore, his face inches from hers, his gray eyes dark and roiled as the Indian Ocean in winter, his face chalk white. Are you crazy, Reza? Do you want to kill yourself? Of course not, she said fiercely, her fright making her snappish. I just slipped is all. Put me down. But he seemed bent on lecturing her at close range. You never listen. You always have to have your way, even if it means breaking your bloody neck. I do not always have to have my way, she said. Yeah? What about the time you just had to ride the Flatlander stallion? What was his name? Deathwish? Devil Spawn? You know, you had to you had to climb the fence to mount him, and his back was so broad your legs stuck straight out, but nothing would do. But you had to give him a try. He snorted. That was the world's shortest ride. She'd forgotten about Amon's annoying habit of repeating old stories she'd rather forget. Reza struggled and kicked, trying to get free. He was definitely a lot stronger than she remembered. Even though she was smaller, she'd always been able to hold her own through force and personality, if nothing else. You know, think about the mess you'd leave behind, Amon said. If you bust your head and I'm in any way involved, I think it's pronounced my DA, not duh. My DA won't leave enough for me for the crows to find. What happened to, if you please, Your Highness? And with your permission, Your Highness, Reza demanded. For the last time, put me down or I'll call the guard. Amon blinked at her, and she couldn't help noticing he had really thick eyelashes, smudging the gray of his eyes. Carefully he set her down on her feet and took a step back. "My apologies, Your Highness," he said, his face gone blank and hard. "Shall I go then?" And just that quick her anger was gone, replaced by remorse. Her cheeks flamed. How could they possibly be friends if she kept pulling rank on him? "I'm sorry," she whispered, putting her hand on his arm. "Thank you for saving my life." He continued to stare straight ahead. My duty, Your Highness, as a member of the Queen's Guard." "Will you stop?" Reza said desperately. "I said I was sorry." "No apology is necessary, Your Highness," Amon said, looking down at her hand on his sleeve. "Now, if there's nothing else—" "Please don't go, Amon," Reza said, releasing his arm and staring at her ruined slippers. "I could really use a friend, even if I don't deserve one." She cleared her throat. "Do you think that's possible?" There was a long pause. Then Amon put two fingers under his chin, and she lifted her head and looked at him. In the moment sent tears spilling down her face. He was leaning down toward his face was very close, and before she knew what she was doing, she slid her arms around his neck and kissed him on the lips. Maybe he was thinking about kissing too, but he pressed his hand against her waist, lifting her tightly against him so her feet nearly left the ground. He returned the kiss with surprising skill and intensity. His lips were a bit rough and windburned, but in a good way, and Reza wasn't ready to stop. When he broke it off and backed away, gray eyes wide with alarm. "I'm sorry, Your Highness," he gasped, reddening, raising his hand, palms out. "Forgive me. I didn't mean—" "Call me Reza," Reza said, moving toward him again, reaching for him. "Please, Reza." He gripped her shoulders, holding her at arm's length. "I don't know what we can do this." Reza blinked at him. "It's just a kiss," she said, feeling rather hurt. "I've been kissed before." There was Mika, of course, and then there's been dark-eyed, intense Reed Nightwalker, Demonia, one of the warriors at Demonic camp, Mushmouth Will Mathis, Keith Clemeth, not Kip, and probably one or two others. It should never have happened. I'm a soldier, and I'm in the Queen's Guard. If my father— "Oh, bother your father," Reza grumbled. "He doesn't have to know everything. He knows things I don't know how, and I would know it awkwardly." Amon groped in his pocket, produced a handkerchief, a hand, no, yeah, a yeah, and produced a handkerchief and handed it to her. Reza knew the kissing was over for the time being, anyway. "When I saw you at dinner, you looked like a princess," he said, graciously averting his eyes from— Sorry, my cat wants in. "When I saw you at dinner, you looked like a princess," he said, graciously averting his eyes from her tear-blotched face. I mean, I always knew that, but you seem different than I remember. Kind of remote. Not what I expected. You look different too, Reza said, blotting her eyes. I didn't even recognize you until Mother called your name. She managed a damp smile. You're very handsome. You know, you might have a lot of sweethearts. She couldn't help thinking he had some practice kissing since she'd last seen him. He shrugged, looking embarrassed. There's not much time for sweethearts at Odensford, he said. Margaret says I'm willful and spoiled. My mother says I'm stubborn. I do try to get my own way, but I think it's because I'll never get my way on anything that matters. She looked up at him. I won't get to choose where I live, or who I marry, or even who my friends are. My time will never be my own. She blew her nose, feeling bad about Amon's handkerchief. It's not that I don't want to be queen, I do. I guess I don't want to be my mother. Then don't be, Amon said, like it was the simplest thing in the world. But most girls would love to be her, Reza said, glancing around guiltily. Sorry, animals have their own mind. Okay, where was I at? But most girls would love to be her, Reza said, glancing around guiltily as if someone might overhear them in the dank tunnel. And I don't know how to be anything different. I don't want to be at the mercy of advisors. But how do you find things out? Other than how do you play the lute or embroider? I mean, at least I know how to ride a horse and get along in the woods and shoot a bow from my time in Damane. My father's got me well on the way of being a trader, but that and embroidery is not enough to be a good queen. Well, I'm no scholar, Amon said, leaning against the wall, seeming reassured that Reza wouldn't attack him again. But there are people in Fellsmarsh who know things. The speakers in the temple, for instance. There's a huge library there. I guess, Reza said. It's just such a ordeal to even go there sometimes. I'd like to be invisible, she twitched, irritable. I don't even know what's going on in the world. My mother's advisors either tell her when she wants to hear what my mother's advisors either tell her what she wants to hear or they're promoting their own agendas. People say she listens to them too much. People being her grandmother, uh, Elena, among others. Now who's the cynic? Amon said. Maybe you need to find yourself some honest eyes and ears. He yawned and rubbed his eyes. Oh, Reza said, stricken. I'm sorry. You said you had to get up. Half an hour into reform, she was being as self-centered and inconsiderate as always. She tried to ignore the voice in her head that said, "That's what queens do." "Come on, let's go." Seizing one of the torches, she led the way down the tunnel, trying to ignore the rustlings of rats and the reflective eyes of the creatures that stared down at her from the imperfections in the walls and scattered ahead of her at each turning. Amon had no trouble keeping up with his long legs. How did this passageway get here? He asked. And who else knows about it? Reza swiped the cobweb from her face. I found it after I came back from Damane. She said, it's really old. I don't know who made it, and I don't think anyone knows about it. I haven't told anyone but you. At last, they reached the roughly circular stone chamber that meant the end of their journey. Here we are, Reza said, setting the torch into the bracket by the door. She slid back the panel and pushed aside the wardrobe. She positioned it in front of the entrance. Where are we? Amon asked, mystified. You'll see, Reza said, picking her way through the minefield of shoes and boots, pushing aside fluffy dresses on the rack. Her bedroom was chilly and dark, the fire dying in the hearth. Her nightgown still laid out on the bed. Amon emerged from the closet behind her and glanced about. His eyes widened, and he looked a little panicked. Reza, is this your bedroom? Yes, Reza said, in an offhand fashion. She crossed to the hearth and poked at the fire, laying on another log. Blood of the demon, Amon swore. There's a secret passage in the walls leading to your bedroom? That doesn't worry you? She looked up at him. No, why should it? In truth, it hadn't. She's been focused on the convenience of having a means to come and go without passing under the eyes of everyone in the busy palace corridors. Somebody made this, Amon said. Who else might know about it? This apartment had been shut up for hundreds of years, Reza said. Maybe 1,000. You should have seen the way it looked before we cleaned it up. Someone made it, but whoever it was would have died a long time ago. Amon was examining the sliding panel, running his hand over the wood, molding surrounding it. You should have it boarded up, Reza. Close it off permanently. You worry too much, Reza said. I've been here 3 months and no monsters have come through. I'm serious. I'm going to talk to your father about it. You will not, Reza said. You promise you won't tell anyone. He tilted his head, frowning. I don't remember promising anything. Anyway, she went on, I'll see if there's a way to put a lock on it. That should do. She crossed to the small pantry, suddenly reluctant to see him go. Do you want anything else to eat? He shook his head, smiling ruefully. I'd better go. We don't want anyone to find me here. Reza shook her head. I guess not, she said. She felt conflicted, confused. On the one hand, she mourned the Amon she'd known in childhood, a friendship that would never be the same. On the other, she felt a thrill of possibility, a breathless fascination with the new Amon and anything he might do or say. She walked him to the door and they stepped out into the hallway. Thanks for dinner, he said. I'm really tired of southern food. He paused, cleared his throat. Don't forget about the tunnel. Sorry I kept you out so late, Reza said, committing to nothing. But I'm really glad you're home. Putting her hand on his arm to steady herself, Reza went up on her tiptoes and kissed him on the cheek. So this is where you've been all evening, someone said in a voice as cold as a demon's kiss. Reza jerked away from Aman and turned, knowing as she did, so it was the wrong thing, the guilty thing to do. It was Mika Bayer, dark eyes glittering in the light from the source. A strong odor of wine said he'd been drinking. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, knowing the best defense is a good offense. "Skulking about the Queen's Tower in the middle of the night?" "I might ask this soldier the same question," Mika said. He seemed rather out of place. "Her Highness asked me to escort her back to her room," Aman said, stumbling onto an excuse that she and Mika always used. "I was just leaving." "I see that," Mika said. "I thought you had a headache," he said to Reza. "I did," she replied. She turned to Aman. "Good night and thank you, Corporal Bryn." She turned to enter her room, but Mika grabbed her arm that loosed power in his grip, stinging her flesh. "Hold on," he said. "Don't rush off. I need to understand something." Reza tried to pull free. "Mika, I'm really tired. Can we talk about this tomorrow?" "I think we should talk about this now," Mika said, glaring at Ahmad, "while we're all here together." "Let go," Reza said, trying to peel away his fingers with her free hand. Suddenly Ahmad's sword was in his hand and pointed at Mika. "Soul Bear," Ahmad said, "the Princess Air has asked you to let go of her. I suggest you do so." Mika blinked and looked down at his hand on Reza's arms, as if surprised to see it there. He let go and took a step back. Reza listened. "I didn't mean—" "You listen," Reza snapped. "You don't own me. I don't think I need to be interrogated if I want to spend some time with a friend. I don't owe you any explanations." Aman stowed away his sword. "Your Highness, it's late and we're all tired. Why don't you go to bed and we'll both be on our way, all right?" Reza swallowed hard and stepped into the shelter of the doorway. Aman planted a hand on Mika's shoulder to propel him down the corridor. But the look Mika fired at Reza over his shoulder said that wasn't the end of it. And that is the end of this chapter. Thank you all for watching, and I hope you enjoyed. Have a great day, great night, and sleep well.